what have you fucked up in business?
It's a big bucket, my friend.
Almost everything.
Well, the cool thing is that you're all successful entrepreneurs. We've all done well, and yet we've made lots of mistakes. So I hope that helps people realize that first of all, mistakes are a massive part of the journey. There's more mistakes than wins always. I've made more mistakes than I can possibly count. There's just too many. But let's see what the patterns are.
Yeah, I'll throw some stuff out there just in case I have to run in a minute. But I'm sure we're all going to touch on some of the stuff people have heard a lot. But I was trying to think what I've done that's maybe interesting, but a little out there. I think a lot of my biggest mistakes in business if they've come from starting businesses for the wrong reason. I think a lot of times I started a business, I actually did it for reasons that had nothing to do with the product or even making money. I was just, oftentimes I was bored. I was longing to just be a part of something, or looking for some sort of community, and I got into these ideas, into these projects, mostly to kind of just fill some different void in my life that I probably should have filled first. And then obviously once things kind of got moving and the hard times started coming, I realized I didn't actually want to be in that business for the business. I didn't even want to be in the business to make any money. I was doing something entirely wrong. So yeah, making sure my head was in the right place, doing it for the right reasons to begin with. Maybe that sounds obvious to other people, but I've done this multiple times in my life, probably at least 3 or 4.
I think in a similar vein, a lot of people create businesses for non-wealth reasons, not yours, but status is another one. To be the boss, to be in charge for status, and maybe not necessarily for community belonging, but people have made similar mistakes, for the same reasons. So it's definitely a common pitfall, I think.
It's like a drug, right? When you start, right? That it's almost like you get addicted to that early stage of a business is so good. You've got hopes and dreams, and you're building something, and it's you almost get drawn to that, and you just want to keep doing that part over and over again because it feels so good and anything is possible. But then if that was all you had, you inevitably hit the rough patch, and you're like, what the hell am I doing here?
I think the old book is the EMyth Revisited, and your comment kind of made me think of how much we look up to entrepreneurs, but the reality is that most people shouldn't be an entrepreneur. And I think I've spoken to entrepreneurship societies at San Jose State and other colleges and whatever, and kind of let them know up front, most of you shouldn't be entrepreneurs. It's not necessarily for most people the best path and the fast path to wealth and financial independence. It's a whole different breed that is sometimes very painful, also really rewarding. But we kind of look up to these mythical entrepreneurs sometimes and evangelize them too much. And I think maybe that's the reason some people get into them versus is this actually my most efficient path to wealth? I have a mistake, kind of a la 14-year-old Eric Johansson, that involves a little hubris from trading in the .com. So me and my business partner at the time, we're fresh off our first business. I would probably describe it as a double or triple in baseball parlance. And we simultaneously started another business at the same time that was maybe a single or double, both profitable and doing 8 figures a year. And then, the ugly head of hubris kind of butted into our brains. And we decided to start a third company. Jeez. And we did not go through our normal de-risking startup process that we rigorously went through in our first 2. And we put in 10 times the capital that we had used to start the 2 previous businesses. We brought on a team right away. We even started, I should go back and laugh at them about this, but we started touring office space that was much larger before we even started the company. And we went for full software product development, long sprint cycles, because hell, we couldn't miss. And for him and I, those were our first two businesses. So we're 2 for 2, couldn't miss. And fast forward is the full crash and burn. And it was very much lighting puke-worthy amounts of money on fire. And the company ended up doing like nominal amounts in revenue. And, luckily we had like profits in the other businesses to write off those losses against, but still, like, looking back, back to like even the investment losses compounded, those would have been very large amounts of money. And so, the lesson I look back on, and just so you know, like, I think a lot of you guys know this, but I keep a little vision board in my phone. It's an album on my iPhone, and I kind of transport all those vision images into a vision board. And in one of those, I keep the logo of that company in there, just to remind me of the hubris I had and the humility I need to take on like any new venture I start, because this is like, it was a really big learning lesson for me. And is like, you need to have the rigor and scrutiny of de-risking the business as efficiently as possible. So like, when you start a business, there's always these set of critical unknowns and assumptions you're making. And you have to run experiments to minimize those unknowns and assumptions as cheaply and quickly as possible. And you guys, listeners can look up several different things: theory of focused planning, discovery-driven growth, lean startup, or minimal viable product. There's lots of like reading on this method. But I think, no matter what your idea is, you have to go through that rigorous process of running experiments to run those, minimize those unknowns and assumptions as cheaply as possible. And just because, another lesson for me personally was, just because you're good at one type of business doesn't necessarily mean you're good at another. And then even learning from the failure of that business, like, your learnings from a failed business are not necessarily the lessons you'll need for the next business. I think Peter Thiel in 0 to 1 talks about like, all failure is bad. Like, people like to grandize like, oh, failure is good, like fail often, fail a lot. But like the failure lessons in one business don't necessarily inform you what you need to do in the next business. So, you want to minimize failure at all points. I don't think like fail often is like a good advice to most early entrepreneurs, but the main lesson is you have to go through that de-risking process, like, no matter what. So, you with this, you made me go through this like mini trauma again by going back in it, but it was super helpful to. Dude,
I've done the same thing. That like happens. Like you have like money because you've been successful, and then you think, well, what would like what Coca-Cola do if they were launching a brand? Yeah, they'd spend money. They hire the best people, they spend all the money, and they're all successful, right? And you kind of think that, oh, I have resources now, so I'll do that. And it seems to never work. But on the other hand, I feel like it would also be dumb to just always do things completely bootstrapped from scratch if you have some. So I guess, like, where do you draw the line? Like, how do you balance, like, if you have been successful and you can spend infinite money, but you shouldn't?
Well, I mean, I think different businesses have different capital requirements, right? Like, starting a blog has a different capital requirement than manufacturing PCs. And so you have to define like, what is the minimum amount of capital and what's the de-risking process for the type of business you're starting, and kind of define the appropriateness based upon the business model you're starting, regardless of what your personal stack is. Because the answer may be, I need to raise money in order to de-risk this type of business. And you don't necessarily need to like put your own money in it, but it's like, okay, for this business model in this industry, what's like the minimum capital I need, and how fast can I de-risk this idea? Not necessarily like how much money is in your own personal bank account.
It's almost like what I hear, Nick, from your story is like getting a little too, you call it, hubris, but just generally becoming a little too eager to skip fundamental steps. Never skip the fundamental steps. They're very important because they lay a strong foundation for the idea and for the business. And after you've done that testing, you're personally more certain, and the business scaffolding itself is more structurally sound, if I can make an analogy out of it. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah, if you're going into a new business, you have to realize you don't know anything. You know nothing about what it takes to run a new type of business. And just because you were successful in business, quote unquote, before doesn't mean you know anything. And so, yeah, that was where we faltered. And, I, like I said, I have that in my little vision board to remind me that like, you don't know anything and you have to like use the scientific method in order to evaluate like if you're on the right track or not.
What are your thoughts on the sort of legal agreements that go into starting a business? Because I feel like I have screwed up both extremes of this. I've screwed up the extreme where I'm like, I trust you guys, nothing's going to happen. Let's just get to the idea and let's just start working. I've also screwed up by trying to put in place way too many things to begin with, burning a bunch of time and money and then having to go back and change stuff anyway. And Nick, I view you as the wise business guru. Or maybe Armand, you have some insights into this as well.
No, I just think
where do you strike that balance?
I just think it's the same answer. It's literally the MVP of that. You have to do it, but the cheapest possible. Like Nick, I don't know, like how much
a term sheet, you Google Doc, you write some bullet points, you both sign it, and you call it a day.
No, I think you go back to like the template you had of the operating agreement you had that you spent $25,000 on one time, and then you strip it and you make it.
What about the person who's never spent $25,000 on an operating agreement?
I don't know, Nick. How would you approach it? I think it's MVP for sure. You can't skip the step. That's one of the biggest things I've learned.
Yeah, for sure. So like when you start a business, there's all kinds of like legal things that you might have to set up, terms of service, privacy policy, operating agreement, vendor agreements, things like that. To me, the most important one is the operating agreement. It's the agreement between you and your business partners on what are you going to do when this thing screws up and when it doesn't go as planned. And luckily I haven't had any like big disputes or big issues, but luckily, and there are business problems, but there hasn't been like operating agreement problems. And I will say like, lean on other entrepreneurs, like, hey, do you have an operating agreement that you've used before? And I have several. So if anyone wants them, I'd happily, share a template in the Discord. But like,
Nick, to be fair, I just want to, you haven't had a problem because you pointed to your operating agreement in times of, right? Can you?
That's a very good point. Like we avoided a lot of problems because there were no verbal agreements. It was like, well, our operating agreement says this. It says like, if one person wants out of the business, this is the method we go through. If we disagree fundamentally on a critical business decision, this is the method we go through.
Capital call. This is the process. Guarantees. This is the process. Voting mechanisms. This is the process. The operating agreement is so fucking important. And, and especially when you start a business with someone that you like, someone that you're friends with, someone that you have a relationship with already. I mean, practically nobody starts a business with someone they don't know, right? And oftentimes people start a business with a good friend. And so what often happens is one of the great mistakes is you, out of respect for the friendship, you want to prioritize the relationship. And to Steven's point, you go, well, hey man, like, we're good. We trust each other. We'll figure this out. And you read articles and you read the books and people tell you, but you need to make sure you check these items off because the inevitable often does happen. These situations do arise, and it's very difficult. The most difficult part about this, and one of the mistakes I've made, is that when you're in the excitement and euphoria of a new business, the last thing you want to think about is the business failing. Not only do you not want to think about it, you don't want to plan for it. You don't want to go into contingency, any form of contingency planning. You don't want to go into like, well, you even have to go into lines in your operating agreement about like, what would happen if we not only disagree and we can't come to a vote, but after mediation, we still can't agree. Like we got a third party involved and we still fucking hate each other and we can't agree. And you have to sit and talk to that person that you love and you care about, who's your friend, about that. And nobody wants to do this stuff. So what do? They go with very cookie cutter templates, and those cookie cutter templates end up fucking you later because you went with things that have absolutely nothing to do with your situation.